Hey guys, good morning. And um, I'm coming live after a very long time, and yeah, I'm just excited. I haven't posted any video for a very long time, so thought like I'll start something for the community. And here it is. Uh, Again, most of the ideas coming from colleagues, those who have worked with me or those who have learned from me, from friends, family, and they all were like, if you can offer something back to the community. So here I am, welcoming you all to this open masterclass on AWS IAM, Identity and Access Management. Before we get started, a little bit about myself. So guys, my name is Mahendra Pandey. I work as a freelance cloud solutions architect cum trainer. Having more than 18 years of experience, I have imparted training and consultation across various domains, have been certified in most of these technologies. Right now, I'm working as AWS authorized champion instructor and Google GCP authorized instructor to impart training on AWS and Google courses. That's the focus right now. Agenda for today, what we are going to cover as part of this open masterclass is I'll introduce you to what AWS Identity and Access Management is. We'll talk about core concepts of IAM, be it users, groups, roles, policies, identity providers, which most of the trainings that I've been through, a lot of people, they keep asking about identity provider, what exactly it is and where do you use it. So for the same reason, I've included the topic about identity federation and third-party authentication. Instead of using your own IAM based user pool, how can you offload the creation and management of users to maybe your Active Directory and synchronize from Active Directory or Okta or Ping into AWS IAM? That's what the focus of the third point is going to be. Fourth, we are going to talk about logging and monitoring for IAM activities. How would you know who did what, from where, when, right? Which resources in AWS were affected by it? So all IAM activities are logged and you can monitor and you can find out the details. I'm also going to talk about some IAM best practices. Now, before we move on, mind it that this session is not going to be about slides and then just discussions. I'm going to use a traditional method. I'm going to use my Blackboard, and also I'm going to show you a lot of demos. So rather than just talking about a concept that gives you a lopsided view of a topic, I would rather be moving to the actual AWS Management Console. And I'm going to do most of the stuff and show you how to take care of different requirements coming your way. So let's move on and start with the first topic here. The first topic in agenda is Introduction to AWS IAM, Identity and Access Management. This is your AWS Management Console. Now, before we get started with this, Mahendra, how did you get into all this? Like, how did you get into the Management Console? How do we create our own accounts if we want? So, guys, if you're interested in, let's see how to create your own AWS account. There. So you search for AWS Management Console, and the first thing that you get to see here is create an AWS account. Right? You need to specify your root user email address. So let me type in that's my mail ID. And you need to specify an account name. Now here you can see I'm specifying my own personal mail ID, but if you're working for a company, but of course it's going to end with at your company domain. You can specify an AWS account name, and I can specify it as my own name. Since this is going to be a personal account, so I can use my name. If not, then this can be based on the project that the AWS account is going to host, or it could be it can also be based on the environment within the project. So let's say this is production environment from project 1, right? So you can give it any name. After this, it's just going to be verifying your mail address and then specifying other details like credit card and other stuff. So by the time you're done with signing up for AWS account, once the process is completed, you will have your own account being created. Now that account will have this mail ID that you have specified as root user mail ID. This is a very important thing. I wanted to focus on this part. The root user email address that you're looking at, once the AWS account is created, most of the time what happens is people use this mail ID to log in as user. Root user mail ID should not be used. It is recommended to keep it safe, not to use it frequently, because every time you're using the root user mail ID and your password, you're sending it across internet, right? Internet does not happen to be a safe place. So best practice says that once you have created a root user, you log in as root user for the first time in your created AWS account. And then after that, you create an IAM user with administrative access, the one who could do administration, and not to use the root user mail ID as frequently, because the root user has unrestricted privileges in your AWS account. So you want to avoid that. You do not want to keep using your root user to log into AWS. Now, as soon as an AWS account is created, you will also be granted a 12-digit unique account ID for the AWS account, which will be associated with this root user. So for this, let me draw. So here comes the blackboard. Now consider this an AWS account. This being created, you will have your root user mail ID. And this root user mail ID will be associated with a 12-digit account ID. Now this 12-digit account ID that you're looking at is unique to this particular account. There may be thousands of accounts or millions of accounts that AWS may have. Out of all those million accounts, how AWS is going to recognize your account is via this account ID, right? Now, why am I saying that the root user mail ID is associated? Every time you log in as root user, you get unrestricted privileges over this account. Unrestricted privileges. Now, that's good, right? You have unrestricted privileges you can use, you can create resources, work with it, you can do many things, but as you might have heard about a quote in a movie that with great power comes great responsibility, right? So if you're logging as root user, what happens is it's not just unrestricted privileges, but you also happen to increase the blast radius if in case anything is to go wrong. What I'm trying to say here is, if the root user mail ID and password is compromised and somebody gains login to your AWS account, the destruction is going to be probably beyond repair, right? So what I want to do is, when I create my AWS account for the first time, I can log in as root user. And as soon as I log in, I want to make sure that I go to a service in AWS called IAM, Identity and Access Management. And this is where I create a user, an IAM user. Let's say I call that user admin. And to admin, I want to give permission. Permission is granted through policies. And this permission, the policy that I'm going to attach to admin IAM user in this account to do all the administrative activity on root's behalf, right? So an IAM user is not a separate AWS account. It's a user within your own AWS account that you may have created. Let's have a look at it. Now, if you see here, I'm logged in as admin user for my account. Now, suppose you've created the account, you've logged in as a root user. You can go to a service. Now, you can find all your services by typing here. You can either search or you can go through the service portfolio list, go to security, and this is where you can find IAM. If not, you can also type IAM, right? Here, if you click on this, it becomes favorite and it shows up here in this ribbon. So I can click on IAM from here as well. Now let's have a look. This 12-digit account ID is quite difficult for me to remember. I can't remember 10-digit phone numbers, mobile, or so this 12-digit account ID becomes very difficult to remember. What you can do is you can provide an alias for this 12-digit account ID by defining an account alias. So in my case, I've used my name as an account alias, but of course, in a company, it's not going to be a personal name. It's definitely going to be based on your project or your environment, or maybe your business unit, department, right? Whatever the AWS account is created for. Now, this account is going to act as a collection of resources that you're going to handle, be it virtual machines, databases, security services, anything that you're going to use will be confined within the account, that is this 12-digit account ID that I'm talking about. So every time I say AWS account, I'm also talking about the account ID here. Do remember this. So as I said, I can't remember 12-digit account ID. I'm going to specify an account alias. Since I've already specified, it is visible here. In case you're creating a new AWS account, this won't be visible, right? It probably is going to be blank. So you can specify that this is the account alias that I want to choose for my account. Now, how is this going to be useful is if you've created a user. Now here you can see I've created some users. Let me delete those which are not required. So I've already created a user. I'm going to create and show you, but for right now, I've already created a user called admin, and I've defined password for admin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in and show you how to log in as an IAM user. But before logging in as an IAM user, Mahendra, what if in case you've already created the account and I want to log in as root? So for that, before we can log in as an IAM user, let's say I just created an AWS account and I want to sign into the console. And as I'm trying to sign into the console, it says that, do you want to sign in as an IAM user? This is a very new account that I've created. So I'm like, no, I don't have an IAM user because I've created this account for the first time. So I'm going to sign in as root user. So that's my root user mail ID and my password. Uh, just give me a minute here. I'm just trying to put in my key on my, for verification. I suppose it's done. I hope I get signed in. Okay. Let's sign in using alternative. No, I can't go back there. I hope this works. I'm touching my security key. I'm definitely going to talk about what this additional verification is. Okay, if not, this may take time. Let's sign in as root user in the same account here. So don't want to sign in as IAM user for the very first time since I've created the account. I am going to there. I'm logged in as root user right now. Let me tell you, here, if you look at, it shows account ID, right? It's not showing me that I'm logged in as a root user. It says account ID. And you can see my name on top here. So I'm logged in as root user. I can go to IAM. Since this is very first time, I haven't even verified. You've seen the notification that it shows. I can go to users. And this is where I can create a new user. I'm using a different account. I'm not using the same account that it was before. And I can specify the name of the user and proceed. I'm definitely going to show you how to create a user. But for right now, what we are going to do is we are going to create a user here. And once you have user created and defined the policy permission for the user, the next time, right, I'm going to keep it safe. I'm not going to log in as root again, because the user that I would have created, I haven't done that, but the user that I would have created, admin, will have all the privileges, permissions to be able to do activities, administrative activities for the account. So let me sign out. Now for the next time, what I'm going to do is, instead of signing in as a root user, I will sign in as an IAM user. Now for IAM user, you need to either remember the 12-digit account ID, which I definitely can't because it's very difficult for me to remember account ID. This is where the account alias is going to be very helpful. So if you've created an account alias, in my case, I've used my own name as the account alias. You will definitely find it easy to just type in your account alias and your IAM username and password and click on sign in. Now you see the difference here. It's not showing me my name, rather it shows my account ID, and it shows that I'm logged in as an IAM user admin. So going back again, an IAM user is not a separate AWS account. It's a user in your own account that you create. Now, once you're logged in as an IAM user, you can do activities depending on what policy or what permission do you have, right? There are two things that we need to remember. There is authentication and then there is authorization. Authentication and authorization. Authentication is where you are going to use your credentials to prove who you are. And authorization is going to be once you confirm that you are who you say you are, either through password or through PKI, whatever method you use for authentication. After that, since you've proven that you are this person, what permission do you have? Do you have permission to access S3 service? Do you have permission to access a specific bucket in S3 service? Or do you have a permission to create a virtual machine in AWS? It will all depend on what permissions are granted. And the permission that we grant here in AWS happens through policies. So let's see this practically. I'm going to create a user. Let's create a user here. I'm creating a user, demo user. And here you can see provide user access to AWS Management Console. This is an important part. If you select this, the user will be able to log into the GUI, the management console that you're looking at. If not, the user will have only programmatic access. Now, what do you mean by programmatic access? Let me So the user that we are creating, IAM user, demo user. Demo user will have two types of credentials. Two types of credential. One credential is going to be for GUI. The other credential is going to be for CLI and also for your software development kit. Now GUI is going to be management console. And CLI is going to be AWS CLI package that you can download and install for Windows, Mac OS, Linux. For GUI, what we have is username and password. Because when you're using GUI, it has to be an interactive, it uses an interactive method of inserting the credential. Interactive method is wherein you type your username and your password and you click on sign in and it takes you in, and that is from where you can manage. Now, if you use SDK or CLI, and if there is any kind of automation that is to be performed, maybe an automation to continuously list my buckets, or maybe I'm developing a software, maybe I'm writing a code in Python to basically fetch the content from my machine and upload it to some virtual machine or S3 bucket. If that happens, you cannot keep defining a username and password for every call that the software makes to AWS. You can't. So you don't want to use an interactive method for those purposes. That is where we make use of access key ID and secret access key. Access key ID and secret access key is used for command line purposes. So we have two types of credential for the same user, demo user. For GUI, we use username and password. And for CLI purposes, for demo user, we are going to use access key ID and secret access key. This is only for authentication. As far as authorization is concerned, for authorization, what the user can do, now once demo user is authenticated either using username, password, or using access key ID and secret access key, what he can do or cannot do will be controlled via policy. So this part that I've spoken about, this is only for authentication. Let's have a look at it. So I want demo user to have management console access. I want to permit him to have so provide access. I want to create an IAM user. A password for the user, which you can keep guessing. User must create a new password at next sign in. So you want to keep this on because you have provided the password here when you're creating. Next time the user logs in, user should have the facility of changing his or her own password. Since this is demo, I'm going to deselect it. You may want to keep it selected, right? So I'm creating a user, demo user, providing AWS Management Console access. We'll talk about what Identity Center is, right? So for this option, I'm going to select an option of I want to create an IAM user, define a password. And when you click on next, it's going to ask you, do you want to set permissions for this user? I don't want to set permissions for the user, right? I don't want to attach any policies. So, and I'm doing that deliberately because I wanted to show you that even though the user can be authenticated, but since the user is not going to have what is known as the policy attached to it, user will not have authorization to work with any of the services. So this is a deliberate attempt. I'm going to attach the policy to the user a little later. So let's click on next, and that's it. I want to create a user. So I created a user called demo user. For this, let's keep it side by side. So this is Chrome browser that I'm using for the main account for creating all the administrative activity, logged in as admin. I'm going to use another browser. So let's use, here you can see I'm using Safari. So that mimics that I'm working on maybe some other system, since I'm using a different browser here. So yes, I want to sign in as an IAM user called demo user. So let's enter the username and the password, and I click on sign in. If you focus on this, look at the account ID. Same account. On the left hand side, I'm logged in as admin user who has administrative privileges. On the right hand side, I'm logged in as demo user, right? Since this is first time, it's going to show me some suggestions. Now, since demo user has no permissions, no policy attached, no permissions to work with any of the services. So whatever service he or she clicks on, let's say he clicks on S3. And wanted to see all the buckets. Here you can see it's very clear. It says you don't have permission to list bucket because the permission does not allow S3 list all my bucket action. Now, before we proceed on, a very important point to note is AWS follows principle of least privilege. It says that anything that is not explicitly allowed is implicitly denied. What that means is, if there is no allow permission defined for a user or a group, by default, everything is denied, right? So since demo user has no permission attached, no policy attached, so no permissions, hence it cannot list the buckets. Let me do that. So what we are going to do is administrator is going to attach a policy to the demo user. Before I do that, let's click on policies and see. There you go. So many policies. And I wanted you to focus on the type of policy that says AWS managed. AWS has pre-created these policies for your usage so that you don't have to create it. If you want to use that, you can utilize. These are all going to be managed by AWS. So whenever they make a change, through AWS, it will be changed. You don't have to do any changes here. So whatever permissions are defined as a part of this AWS managed policy, since this is managed by AWS, any permission that they add or remove will be automatically effective for you. Now, if you feel like these permissions defined by AWS are too restrictive or they are granting too much of access, you have a facility of creating your own policy. That policy will be known as customer managed policy. So customer managed policy is a policy that is created by us. Unless and until we make changes to the policy remains as it is. There are going to be no updates. Unlike in case of AWS managed, if AWS makes any changes, it will be visible for your AWS managed policies. Now, what exactly policy is? If you look at it, you will find that policies are simply JSON documents. JSON documents with 5 important elements that you need to understand. A policy contains let's draw this again. A policy is a JSON document that contains statements like effect, principle, action, resources, and condition. Effect can be defined as allowed or denied. So it can be allow or deny. Principle is an identity. It can be user, roles, groups, etc. Then action is defined as which service. For example, the name of the service is S3, right? Or maybe the name of the service is EC2. So for S3 service, what action? Download a particular file, get object, upload an object, put object, list bucket. So what permission, what action, that is what API calls, rather I can say that these are basically API calls. What API calls do you want to permit? What action can the principal take? So if you specify individual, you can write it down. If not, if you want to be too permissive, you can simply specify asterisk. That's a regular expression that is accepted that says all the actions related to S3 service. Now, if you define a name of a service, it is only for S3, but if you do not define and you say asterisk for this as well, that means all AWS services and for that service, all the API calls, that means all actions are permitted. That's what you're trying to say here. This is too permissive, so I'm not going to do that. I would rather keep it as only S3. Now resources define that in S3 service, depending on which action, right? So since we are talking about S3 and S3 is going to have buckets and objects as resources, you may want to specify that you want to allow for a particular user these S3 actions, but only on the specified resource, right? So I'm going to specify the resource as a particular bucket. Now, instead of bucket, if you specify asterisk again, that means you're using regular expression, wildcard expression that says everything. That means all the buckets or all the objects, right? Final thing, a condition. Condition specifies that all these statements are going to be true only if these conditions are fulfilled. So the permissions are going to be effective only and only if the condition turns out to be true. For example, I can specify that allow a particular user to upload a file in S3 bucket, bucket 1, only if the AWS API call is coming from an IP block of 192.168.1.0/24. That means only if the incoming request is coming from an IP address 192.168.1.0/24. So it can be 1.1, 1.2. If it is any other requester other than this block of IP, do not permit. So it can either be on IP based on a particular date and time, based on a particular region. So there are multiple conditions that you can use, right? Mind it that in a policy, everything else is compulsory, but principle and conditions, these are optional. So three things which are extremely important is effect. Do you want to allow, deny, action, and resource? Once the policy is created, you can easily attach that policy to a principle, or you can attach that policy to a particular resource as well. The policies can be broadly categorized as identity-based policies. So that means you create a policy for a particular user defining what resource he or she can or cannot use. Or you can use resource-based policy. Like I can also go to an S3 bucket and specify a permission in the bucket that only these principles are permitted to upload into this bucket. So it can either be a resource-based policy or it can be a identity or principle-based policy. So put it simple, a policy is a JSON document that grants permission So let's look at, I wanted to use AWS managed policy for S3. If I search for, there is something called S3 full access and S3 read only access. I wanted to show you the effect of both, but before doing that, I wanted you to also read. So this policy says allow, and it's not specifying any principle. We are going to attach it to a principle called demo user. So allow all S3 actions. We can ignore for S3 object lambda for timing. All S3 actions on all S3 resources, right? So let me go to this user, demo user. And I go to security credential. You can see here permission policies. Let me go to security credential and show you that console access is enabled. As you can see, console password, last login. And we haven't created anything for command line access, which I'm going to in some time. So credentials is where you get to see and change password and do all those stuff. But for right now, I'm going to be here, permissions. And for user, demo user, the permission policy that we are going to attach is S3 full access. Click on this, scroll down, say next, and add permission. So now you can see demo user has a permission of S3 full access. The moment I go back to the other window, to the right hand side, and I say refresh, it starts showing all the buckets, because now user has permission for listing the buckets. Since he has all the permissions, the user can also create a bucket. So let me do that. Create bucket. That's the name of my bucket. Let's go ahead and create it. See if that's permitted for demo user. And there you go. It is. Right? Imagine if I remove this permission. So admin user removes the permission for the user, and adds a permission for read-only access. Attach policy S3 read-only access. Now, if you click on read-only, you will find that it allows only get object, get bucket, list object, list bucket, describe, but it's not permitting create verbs. These are verbs, right? That defines action. So create or delete, it's not defining those permissions. Click on next, S3 read only, add permission. Now, since this is S3 read only permission, after you or your AWS administrator has updated permission to allow list all my bucket action, you can see list all my buckets. Do we have list related action here? It shows, so maybe it takes a little bit of time to update and propagate. Here it is. So I can list since it has permission for listing, but since there is no create, if I go ahead and try to create a bucket name and say create bucket, it's very clear in response. It says that demo user is not authorized to perform S3 create bucket because no identity policy allows create bucket action. Right? So I can't. So user is granted or revoked an access based on what permission policy is attached to the user. Now, all these policies that you're looking at can be created once over here and can be utilized for all the users that you've created. So if I create a policy called S3 demo policy, I can attach it to admin, demo user, and to all the other users in my list. Now, if you focus on adding permission, there is also something called as create inline policy. Now, an inline policy has a one-to-one relationship to the user or the group. One-to-one relationship is it is explicitly created only for this user. It won't be available for other users. So if I click on create inline policy, I can choose for which service do I want to create it for, what actions do I want to allow, right? For all AWS buckets. And you can specify the name for this demo policy for demo user. You can see here a difference because I created it as customer managed, and since it is inline, that means it is explicitly created only for demo user. If you take this policy name and you try to search for it over here, demo policy, there is no such policy called demo policy here, because any policy that you will create in policies tab will be visible and available for all users and groups. But the one which you create as inline policy is explicitly one-to-one relationship with only this user. That's an inline policy. Let's move on to the next part. So let's say the user has since there is an inline policy and I've permitted, it's fine. The user can perform actions. Next part is about groups. So do we really create users and keep attaching policies and detaching policies from the users? No, we don't. We don't do that, right? What we do rather is we create groups. So by creating a group, I attach a policy to the group. Every time I'm creating a user, adding the user to the respective group, the user is automatically granted the permissions. It automatically inherits the policy. So let me create a group as well, creating a group called demo group. I'm not adding any user to the group right now. I'm just attaching a permission. So let me attach a permission called administrator access. That means any user who is added to the group demo group will be automatically having all the permissions, administrative privileges, no restriction, except for certain parts, not all. So let me add user. So this is a group created. You can see here demo group. And if I click on permission, what permission demo group has? Administrator access. If I add a user, add user, and I want to add demo user to the group, you can go back and check in users. If I click on demo user, so it says administrator access AWS managed attached via group demo group. It's not directly attached, it is attached via group demo group. So in a real-time environment, you won't be creating users and attaching individual policies to the user. Rather, we create user and add them to the group. By adding or removing them to the group, they are automatically granted permissions, or the permissions are revoked the moment they are removed from the group. So it becomes a lot more easier to manage the users from here in this way. Now, do you keep creating users for every user and application that we are going to create? For users, obviously we will, but for applications, we don't use this, guys. Users has a limitation. You cannot have more than 5,000 users. Imagine if you're working in a company, right, which has more than 5,000 microservices, and all these microservices, they need permission to talk to AWS services, some or the other AWS service. You will easily exhaust the number of users that you can keep creating for those applications in your company. So for applications, we don't make use of the users tab and we don't create users. Rather, we use something called as roles. So I'm going to talk about roles. Holding back on roles thought here, we have already done about the credential part. Let me also show you, since we've already seen the credential, username and password. Mahendra, what about access key ID and secret access key? How do I use that? Right? Let's see this. So for the same user, demo user, I can go to security credential. This is where I have username and password, interactive way of authentication. That is for your GUI. But for CLI, we never use that. For CLI, we have access key. So I will have to create access key. I can click on create access key. You want to use it for command line. I understand. Next. If you want to define some tag. And if I click on create access key, it is going to generate an access key and secret access key for user, demo user. So there it is, access key. I'm not going to show you secret access key, but just to give you an idea. Key and secret key. This is how it is going to look like. I'm going to show you. This is how it looks like. So access key ID and secret access key. You can consider this as people, those who cannot comprehend. I mean, I'm really sorry to use that. Not comprehending is people, those who still can't wrap your heads around what exactly access key ID and secret access keys. Access key ID uniquely identifies a particular IAM user from millions of accounts. You can consider that as an username and password to keep it simple, right? So once the secret access key shows up over here, and if I click on done, the secret access key is gone forever. It cannot be visible at all. You'll get to see the access key, but you will never ever see the secret access key. So never store access key in plain text. Disable or delete access key when no longer needed. Enable least privilege permission and rotate access key regularly. These are just best practices of IAM. So just so that I don't forget, I'm going to click on download CSV file, and this downloaded CSV file that I have keeps my access key and secret access key, right? Not going to show it completely here. Security reasons. I may delete it later, that's fine. But not right now. I don't want anybody to have access to the system here while we are live. So I've copied it and I click on done. So this for GUI and this for command line. Mahinder, how do I use command line? Where exactly is this going to be useful? To do that, let's go ahead and let's create a simple virtual machine to understand where it is going to be usable. So I'm going to be quick here, guys. This is not EC2. This is just an IAM demo machine. I'm using my EC2, guys. It's not necessary that you have to do that in EC2 itself. You can have any other virtual machine. That virtual machine can be running in VMware, or it could be your own laptop. Doesn't matter. Since I don't have any other machine, I'm using this here. Now that's my Linux machine. I just need to make sure that I have AWS CLI installed in this. So AWS CLI is already installed. So this comes pre-installed. If not in your machine, you can do sudo yum install AWS CLI or apt-get install AWS CLI. If you're using Windows, AWS CLI for Windows, you can download. There it is, the link to download the MSI file, and you can double click to install it on Windows. Also for your Mac OS, it's the same process. So download for Mac OS, the PKG package file, double click and it installs. Once installed, you will have to configure like if I want to work with S3 bucket, I want to list all S3 buckets in command line. When I do this, it says unable to locate credential. You can configure credential by running AWS configure. Let me improve the font. After installing AWS CLI, so I go and I say AWS configure. It's asking me for AWS access key ID. I do have access key ID. Here it is. So I'm going to put in that. Now it's asking for secret access key. Let me put secret access key here. But before I do that, let me go ahead and also be a little smart. I want to remove, I don't want to give administrative access just in case. And remove all the permissions. So yeah, I mean, I'm safe here. Even if somebody logs in using the access key ID and secret access key, there is nothing that you can do because demo user has got no permissions. So that's fine. I'm safe here. I can go back and I can just paste in the secret access key, keeping everything else as it is. Now, once you configure, there is a hidden folder that it creates in your own home directory where it keeps all the credentials in plain text, as you can see. This is also a security implication, which we'll talk about momentarily. So since my AWS is configured, now if I go ahead and I try to do AWS S3 LS, now it's not the same error that it gives. It's not saying that your credentials are not located, but now it says that demo user is not authorized to list all my buckets. But of course it is not, because I've taken away all the permissions. Let's add permission for S3 read-only access. Since demo user has this, now if I go ahead and I try to do S3 LS, it lists all my buckets, and you can verify that. I can show that to you side by side via the bucket names. AWS class demo, as you can see here, it is the same. These are the same buckets that are showing up. Right? So that is where we are clear about two types of credential, one for GUI and one for command line. If I can install, maybe if I'm trying to code something in Python, I will have to download the module for Python for SDK. It's called Boto Core or Boto 3 basically. And you can do programming as well from here. For programming, whatever you're going to run, Python is going to utilize the same access key ID and secret access key to talk to those services that the program is designed for, or Python code is written with. So that was for users. Now moving on, since we've already spoken about policies, users, and groups, now let's move on to roles. What are roles? Guys, as I said, it becomes very difficult for me to go beyond 5,000 IAM users. We are not permitted to have more than 5,000 IAM users. And imagine if your project in your company is having more than 10,000 microservices, there is a possibility that you may have 10,000 microservices, right? So for each of that microservice, are you going to keep creating user to grant them permissions? No, we don't. So what we do is we utilize a role and we ask applications to assume the role and get the permission to talk to the service. Let's see how it is done. So for that, let me bring up my Blackboard. So AWS IAM roles, let's say I'm creating a role called demo role. Role has two important elements associated with it. Those two important elements are, first, defining who can assume the role. And second, once somebody assumes the role, what the application or the user is permitted to do. So here we have, here we have what is known as trusted entity who can assume the role, a trusted entity that can assume the role. And second part is, once the trusted entity assumes the role, what policy is associated with the role. That's it. These are the two important things, two important elements of any role that you will create, right? Let's create it. Now there are some pre-existing rules for different services. For us, I'm going to create a demo role. And now who is going to be the trusted entity who is permitted to assume the role? Trusted entity that is permitted to assume the role, is it an AWS service who's going to assume the role? Is it an AWS account that is going to assume the role? Is it some other web identity? So web identities, you'll have to choose the web identity provider who can assume the role, right? Or is it from some other SAML 2.0 federation provider, or it's a custom trust policy that you want to? Who's going to be the principal who will be allowed? Who can assume the role? So I say custom trust policy, and let's say the name of my application, the application that I've created, let's say it is demo app dot project one dot mycompany.com. Sorry, I'm really sorry, it is asking about the principal, so I can specify some other principal's name. Or what I'm going to do is I would rather be more comfortable with web identity, and let's say web identity, I say Google. You'll have to define the audience. There is a setting that you'll have to do in Google for the same, right? So a web identity provider can perform that task of assuming the role. For right now, let's say for simplicity, I choose EC2. For simplicity, I choose EC2 as a service who can assume the role. And once the role is assumed, what policy do you want to grant? S3 full access. Let's click on, let's say this is demo role, create role. So guys, that's the role that we have created, demo role, right? The trusted entity who can assume the role is ec2.amazonaws.com, right? And the permission is this. Now let me tell you that this part is defining authentication using PKI authentication, and this part defines authorization. So authentication and authorization. How is it going to work, Mahinder? To be able to make it work, what we will do is we are going to program. Let's say we are writing a program. There is one more service that I haven't spoken about. Let me show you. This service exists, but it's not existent in the portfolio. So if you click on the portfolio, you may not find that service, but that service is definitely there and alive, and that's called STS. As you can see, I'm trying to ping the service STS. STS basically stands for Security Token Service. Security Token Service. Now what happens is this. Trusted entity, here I've defined EC2 service. That is a trusted entity. And policy that we have defined is S3 full access. Now, let's say I have a virtual machine running in EC2. ec2.amazonaws.com, right? It's an EC2 virtual machine or instance that I'm running. And this machine is trying to assume the role, demo role. What comes into picture is the service will have to make a request to STS first. It goes to STS and says, hey STS, I want to assume the role with this ARN, Amazon resource name. every resource that you create in Amazon AWS has Amazon resource name. Here is the Amazon resource name ARN for the role that uniquely identifies ARN colon AWS. That's going to remain constant. ARN colon AWS, that defines that it's a Amazon resource name for AWS. The moment you move to China, it is AWS -CN, because they're working the way how they are using AWS is a little different than us. So for the entire world, it's going to be ARN colon AWS. Only for China, it is ARN colon AWS -CN. I'm not aware about other countries, so that is just the thing that I've read about. So ARN colon AWS remains constant. After that, it's going to be the name of the service. The third part, the name of the service, since this is IAM. The next part that you see here, an empty block, that's a region if in case the service is region specific. Since IAM is global, hence this portion is blank, right? And then it is showing me 12-digit account ID. In this account, it is a role that we are talking about. So IAM role, and the name of the role is demo role. So it does not matter if you create demo role in your own account or multiple other accounts, because what is going to be different is going to be your account ID. So that's how it uniquely identifies. And that's exactly is what going to happen is when my virtual machine, that is the EC2 service, will make a request to STS that I want to assume the role demo role. STS is going to throw a challenge. STS says, wait, let me check who is the trusted entity. And trusted entity shows that it is ec2.amazonaws.com. Now, requester, Mr. Requester, if you can prove that you are who you say you are, this is where PKI comes into picture. This is where it's going to use certificate, going to go to certificate authority, verify the fingerprint and SHA hashes. And once the certificate authority confirms that this is the certificate of the requester who he says he is, or who the EC2 says it is. So once this verification is done, the authentication has already taken place. The authentication part will be done. So in case STS, it's going to ask for authentication. EC2 supplies its certificate. STS verifies that certificate via CA, certificate authority, confirms that it's actually EC2 who is making a request, and that is the only time when it is going to permit EC2 to assume the role. Once the role is assumed, it's going to take into consideration what policy. Based on all this, it's going to create a temporary credential. Now this temporary credential contains temporary access key ID. It's going to create secret access key. It's going to define the expiration time for this, since this is a temporary credential, right? Now that credential will be granted. This credential is created. I'm sorry. It is created by STS and then granted to this virtual machine, right? Since this virtual machine now has what? Now has got access key ID and secret access key. Do you recollect? These are the two important components you need, right? And then the permission itself says S3 full access. The virtual machine, even though you do not configure any access key ID or secret access key, if you've configured a role the virtual machine will be able to get access to S3 via the temporary credential. Mind it, I'm using EC2 because I do not have any other application in place. But if I have an application, I will have to get the certificate, the public key, private key. And once that part is done and we have a proper FQDN for that, I can specify that FQDN as a trusted entity for a role. So even if it is sitting outside AWS, they'll be able to still make a request and get the temporary credential. Right? Now, Mahinder, you say this is temporary credential. That means it is automatically going to rotate itself. Now, what is the maximum duration that credential is going to be valid for? That is what is visible here. Maximum session duration. It shows 1 hour. If you want to make a change, you definitely can. So what happens after 1 hour? After 1 hour, the application will make a request to STS again. The STS is going to grant a new temporary credential to the application. So this way, you are following a security best practice of rotating the credential every hour, keeping it safe. Now, how it is done programmatically is, as a programmer, you will define this entire routine. So I say, I want to invoke STS, and here I want to specify the role ARN. Let's go back and specify the role ARN. That's the ARN, right? Credential and EC2 client, right? This is the credential that I need. It says response and print response. Let's see if this is okay. Now, if you understand, I have just run this and it says that user admin is not authorized to perform STS assume role because I'm logged in as admin here in my command line. And since admin is not permitted to assume role, it's not admin, right? Admin cannot. So that's the error. If EC2 does, we'll be able to see it. So if I go back to EC2, and for EC2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the old configuration. Let's remove the old configuration. So AWS S3 LS, I can list all the buckets. I can because there are this configuration files which are holding my credentials. So let me remove them. And now if I try to do S3 LS, it says you can't, unable to locate credential. Now I go back to instance, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm not doing it from here. Rather, I want to attach a role to this EC2 instance. So action, security, modify IAM role. Now I've got demo role, update IAM role, demo role for demo IAM. Now, if EC2 makes a request, I want to show you, can keep an eye on that I do not have any credential details written down over here. I don't, right? You can see it. But if I run AWS S3 LS, I can list all the buckets. The reason for that is it has assumed the role, demo role, and it has got a temporary credential. we can see temporary credential details. Let me show you that as well. Latest. Those who are not aware about it, guys, this is a metadata service that I'm using in AWS. Identity credential. EC2 security credential slash EC2 hyphen instance. There it is. So this is the access key ID, this is the secret access key, and that's the expiration time in Zulu, that is UTC. This is from where it's utilizing the access key, and just to confirm this, CUFKU, that's the access key ID. If I go back and show you in role, okay, we can definitely see that in activity details. I'm going to talk about CloudTrail in a moment. That is where I'm going to show you that this role is assumed, and we'll be able to see the exact access key ID generated by the role. So even though I do not have the credentials kept in my home directory, I can still call S3 and list all the buckets, is because of this temporary credential which is granted to me. And you can see here the date and time when it is going to be revoked. This is in UTC coordinate. So if you convert that, it will be 1 hour from now. So for applications, or a best practice in security, the best practice says that you should always rotate the credential. You don't have to do no other automation is required. You don't have to do much of a work. You can easily do so by creating a role, and role will automatically rotate the credential every 1 hour or 2 hours, whatever you specify as the timing, right? So that's about users, groups, roles, and policies. Those are core concepts. Now let's look at identity federation and third-party authentication. Third-party authentication. That means I do not want to create users here. What I want is I want the users to be imported from my Active Directory service that has been running in my own company. My company has an Active Directory server that we maintain for our purposes. So I want it to be picked, the users and groups to be picked from that Active Directory service. How do I get my users imported here? Now for that, you can define an identity provider. Identity provider. I can add a provider, define a name, SAML or OpenID Connect based. I'm sorry, guys. Provider type, OpenID Connect and SAML is all out of scope of this particular open masterclass. Maybe if maybe later, if I have something that comes up, I'll definitely be interested in showing what is the difference and how this works. But for right now, there is no way how I can get into this differences and tell you. But let me specify that Active Directory uses security assertion markup language, SAML, right? Now you can create a provider from here, but if you see, it very clearly says that if you use IAM Identity Center, it will make it easy to centrally manage access to multiple accounts and provide user with single sign-on access as well. Single sign-on. That means a user is created in Okta or Active Directory and the user can easily sign in into AWS without explicitly creating a user here. Wow, that's awesome, isn't it? What that means is, this is my company. This is my company. And here in my company, I have an Active Directory server. Depends, you're using Active Directory or maybe you're using something called as Okta or Ping Identity, whatever. All works in the same way because all of them, they support SAML. So Active Directory, somebody creates a user called say John in Active Directory. What I want is, as soon as the user is created in my AWS account, the user must automatically appear. The user must automatically appear as using the username and password. And then depending on the configuration that I do, yes, I can do configuration here that any user that comes in will have what permissions. So permission configuration, we'll have to do that from AWS side, but we can definitely import users from Active Directory servers from Okta and Ping into AWS account. And by granting them permissions, these users can use their own username and password to log into the AWS account and do the work. You don't have to explicitly create IAM users or groups for the same. That's federated identity, right? Because now there are two entities involved. There is my company and there is AWS. So since we are talking about multiple companies coming together, it's federation, right? Federated identity. Let's have a look at it. I'm going to show you a demo for the same. Now for this, as said, we are not going to add the identity provider from here. Rather, I'm going to use Identity Center. IAM Identity Center. Identity Center is not enabled, so let me go ahead and enable Identity Center. There it is. Identity Center is enabled, and this is your AWS Access Portal. awsapps.com/start. I don't want this random string for the purposes. I would rather click on edit and let's put in our subdomain. Demo cloud already associated with some other directory. So maybe democloud.1 demo cloud 123. Let's take that. Perfect. So it is democloud123.awsapps.com/start. Let me close this window and show you what is the effect of this. Since I've just enabled Identity Center, if I type democloud123.awsapps.com/start, sign into democloud123. Now this can be your own company, right? I'm just typing democloud123, sign in. We can also change the look and feel of this window. Instead of showing AWS logo, it can show a logo of your own company, right? You can change the background, how it looks like. You can so most of the things are customizable. So that way, a person who's trying to type in will feel that it's your own portal that you're trying to work with. Now here, the username that it's asking for, we are looking at a demo of IAM Identity Center to enable single sign-on and make it a lot more easier for me to manage users and groups rather than using IAM users and groups to log in, where I have to explicitly create an IAM user. Here, I want to import the user from some other provider. For this demo right now, I'm going to manually create a user here, right? Manually create a user to log in and to show you that the user can log in and have access to AWS account. Let's call it John at democloud.1. That's the username. That's also the email ID of John. John, last name, single. That's the user that I want to create. Now, this is manual creation. This is not what I want to do, but this is just for the demo to show you that if you go to this SSO console for Demo Cloud Company, you can log in using the username and password. So next, not going to be part of any group. Add user, and the user is granted one-time password. So let me copy that and close. Now you see created manually, right? Created manually. I want to log in here. Let's say the username. Next, asking for password. I'll enter one-time password. As soon as I do, it will ask me that you'll have to change Okay, so here MFA is compulsory. Let me no, I don't want that. So by default, MFA has been kept compulsory for users. I didn't want it, so I just went to settings and disabled. We refresh. Let's do this once more. I have no idea why is it taking so much of time. When it shows up. Yep. So username John, temporary password for John, and here it is asking for new password. So set new password. Okay. I hope this password works. Data set. Okay. Wow, that was a struggle. Okay. So here it says you have navigated to AWS Access portal. After your administrator gives you access to applications and AWS account, you can find them here. So John is logged in, but since we haven't permitted John anything, it cannot see any application, neither AWS account to be able to log in. So what we are going to do is let's go to John, assign this account, assign him this account, and permission set. What permission John is going to have on this account. So I'm going to use some predefined permission set for it. Now, whatever I'm doing right now, guys, this is all a manual approach to SSO. This is just a POC that if in case you can get users imported from federated identities, you can definitely have them logged in. So I want to grant John a permission on this account and an administrative permission, an administrator access. So permission set administrator access for John. Now if John refreshes the screen, okay, not yet. So we've created for this account, John will have administrator access, assign. There it is. So this account is available for John as administrator. Now refreshing, it shows an AWS account. So John logs in an AWS account. What you can do, as I said, this is also an SSO solution, single sign-on. Single sign-on, you use a single username and password. Now I can go to applications. In IAM Identity Center, I can go to applications. I can add applications like Microsoft 365. Office 365, right? If I click on next, so that application will be added in the list. So maybe Office 365 or Adobe Creative Cloud. You have, what is there? So many. App Dynamics, you want to log in with, to what else? A very frequently used application. Salesforce. So if I select these applications and I keep adding, John will have all these applications listed here. John will have to remember only one username and password to log in to this Access portal. And once he has logged in, he can simply click on application and that opens up in a new window where John will not have to authenticate again. The repetitive authentication is not required. You're logged in once to the Access portal. From there, you can access hundreds of applications, provided those applications are configured for you by the administrator. So I'm logged in as an admin. If I configure application for John, John will be able to see all those applications here. Right now, I've configured only one thing for John, and that is access to this AWS account as an administrator. So John is already logged in. And if John clicks on this account and clicks on administrator access, I want you to pay attention to what kind of access John gets. There you go. Now you can see on top, you can see very clearly it says federated user. And instead of showing admin at Mahendra Pandit, it says administrator access for John at democloud.1. This was a manual approach to creating a user. We don't use manual. This is not to be created manually. Rather, what we do. So you can see here, there is a proof that it's John who is logged in as administrator. Now, it's logging into the AWS account, but if you have applications configured for John, John is simply going to click on the application. It opens in a new window where John will not have to re-authenticate again. Right? Just one username and password and can have access to multiple things. Now, when you said that we can import users, you don't have to manually create, right? Yes, you don't have to. For that, you have to go to settings in Identity Center. And identity source, you have to change identity source and click on external identity provider. It's not the identity center who is going to provide users and groups. It is an external identity provider. And now it is asking you to define identity provider metadata. Exchange of information will happen. The identity provider's metadata will have to be filled in here, and identity centers, my AWS account identity centers metadata will have to be fed into the identity provider for trust relationship, so that both can trust each other. So you are going to establish a trust. For this, you need to have an identity source. Right now I don't, so I'm going to create one. Let's practically see this. I'm going to use Okta for the same. And in Okta, I'm going to start for a free trial. My name. Cloud.1. My number. And I'm from India. I want to start a free trial. So for democloud.1, that's the domain, that's the company that Okta is going to provide me a free trial account for. So I'm doing this right from scratch. You may wonder, Mahinder, where is this demo cloud? Guys, you can go to you can go to GoDaddy, BigRock, Hostinger, Namecheap. You can buy a domain and just go for their email services that they offer, right? So that way you'll be able to create 1 or 2 email IDs like I've created for my myself. It has sent me a mail. Let me show you on my iPhone here. Also on my here it is. You can see this mail that I have received. I just need to click on activate Okta account. There it is. Signing into the account to access Okta admin console, it says set up security method. Security method helps protect your demo cloud trial account by ensuring you have access. Choose a password for your account. So I click on set up password. Let me check this. Okta Verify. Okta Verify is an authenticator app installed on your phone or computer used to provide identity. Okay, set up. So it is asking me to download Okta Verify application, and so I'm going to go to my phone. Let's download Okta Verify. Let me show while I'm doing it. So Okta Verify mobile app. There it is. I open this application. Okay, I've used this before, so it's showing me all those. Let me go for a new one. Yes, I'm ready to scan. And ready to scan. There it is. Enable. Done. Perfect. Choose the apps that are most important to integrate. Maybe I want to integrate Google Workspace, Slack, Zoom, Active Directory, Office 365. Let's choose that my users are from. Done. So guys, this is from where I can get started. Choose application. And in application, I can create app integration, or maybe from the application, I can browse app catalog, and I get to see, because it was showing AWS Identity Center. So I can do AWS. There it is, AWS Identity Center. That's the application that I want to integrate in Okta. Let's click on add integration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create all my users in Okta, and since I'm going to integrate IAM Identity Center over here, whatever users I'll create in Okta will be visible in IAM Identity Center. SAML 2.0 is enabled. New user is disabled. Deactivation is disabled. Sign on. App and editor list. This is probably what we are searching for. The sign-on method determines how a user signs in and manages their credential for an application. Okay. That's where metadata is. let's open that link. Okay. Well, I can get all this metadata and save it. Here it is asking for IDP sign in URL. So that will go to, let's call this and put it into a file, Okta on my desktop. Okta.xml. So this is the XML that it's looking for, IDP SAML metadata. That's the metadata. So I've basically got that into a file. So I'm going to click on choose file and Okta.xml. And download metadata file from here. And we'll have to upload that, use SAML setup instructions. Here it has all the instructions. Sign on tab, click edit. Okay, perfect. Now here you can see Okta.xml contains all the details. So I'm changing identity source. What it is instructing here, change identity source. That's what I've done. Let me initiate it again just to show you. So here the identity source was identity center directory, the users which were created manually. I click on change identity source, external. The metadata file that I downloaded for Okta. So that is something that I'm giving here. I've already downloaded my service provider metadata. Now it's saying that I will have to go and insert those details. Sign on tab, click edit. So sign on, click edit. I think so we should make it a little bigger. Yeah, here it is. It is asking for AWS SSO ACS URL and issuer URL. And we are going to copy that from here. ACS URL and issuer URL. So there it is. That's ACS and that is issuer. Here I'll click on next. Just saying that you're changing the identity source. So do you want to accept it? I say yes, I want to accept changing it to this. External identity provider, SAML 2.0. Provisioning method, it is still showing manual. I want to enable automatic provisioning so that every time I'm creating a user here, I want to configure API integration. Enable automatic provisioning. This is my SCIM endpoint. So I will have to configure API integration here. Base URL is this SCIM URL that you're going to put in. API token, you can show token, copy and paste it here. Test credential. Identity center was verified successfully. You save it in Okta. SCIM is configured, so it will take care of automatic provisioning. Perfect. Now, going back to Okta application, and I was configuring IAM Identity Center. Let me check that. Push new user is disabled. I want to enable this. Update user attributes, deactivate user. All this is from Okta to AWS. I want to enable. There you go. All three icons enabled. Right. Now let's create people and see if those people appear in users list over here. Now for that, I'll have to create users. So let's create people. Add person. Let's say Bob Singer. Bob at democloud.1. I will set the password. User must not change. That's gonna be that's it. Click on save. So that's Bob Singer, another user. Activate the person. Now that's the user created in Okta. We haven't assigned this user. As you can see, if I try to refresh, we haven't assigned this user to the application, right? So let's go to the application, Identity Center, assign username Bob Singer. Save and go back. Done. So Bob Singer, an individual user, is assigned to Identity Center. If we check, there you go, Bob at democloud.1. Can you see it is coming from SCIM? Secure cross-account identity management. right? So we have created a user in Okta, but it's visible in Identity Center. Now you may think that the user comes in here, but Mahinder, you haven't assigned now. Is it that every time a user will be created, an AWS account will have to be assigned? No, we don't do that. What I'm going to do rather is I can create a group here, assign permissions in this group, it starts appearing, and every time I add a user to the group, it takes effect here as well, and the user automatically gets the access based on the permissions defined in the group. So let's create a group. Add group, name AWS administrator. AWS administrator. Now going back here, and assigning the group, assign to group, assign AWS administrator to this. Save and go back. Done. Now the group is assigned here, since if you try to refresh, you can also push it. So I'm trying to push, and there you go. So through skim, AWS administrators are here. Assign the account and administrator access. There is one-time setting that I'm doing here. Perfect. So now every user that is added to the group, as you can see here, I can go to users and see Bob has no AWS account assigned right now because he's not part of the group. Now what I can do is, the moment I add Bob to the group here, assign people, and I'm not doing it from here. The identity source is coming from Okta, not from here. So I'm not going to make any change. I'm not going to add a user to this. No. So I assign people, and I say Bob Singer is assigned into the group AWS administrator. That's it. I'm just checking. Back to groups. Just giving it a refresh to see if, yes, Bob is assigned to the group. It was not updating here. And since it is assigned to the group, it will also be assigned an account. right? Now, just the way how John manually created could log in, Bob can also log into the, let's check that. Sign out. If only it could load a little faster. If not, eternity. One. Okay. So as you can see here, it has taken me to the page of Okta and it's asking for authentication. You're connecting to AWS, sign into your account. Okay, so here it goes, Bob at democloud.1. Verifying Bob. Verify. Okay, using Okta, it just keeps going back to Authenticator app and it's asking Bob to use Okta Verify. It's like MFA, multi-factor authentication. So Bob will also have to do that, the same procedure that you've seen before. Scan. Account is added for Bob. Signing into AWS IAM Identity Center. And there you go. Bob at democloud.1 has already been assigned the account. If there were any application, would have listed here. And you see the username and password that I've used is the one which I had created in Okta for Bob. I haven't created anything manually in Identity Center. It's all through Skim, right? So here, clicking on administrator access. Perfect. Federated user, right? Administrator access, Bob at democloud.com. Now it's not just Bob. Let me show you. We can create more. Just to let you know, if I create people, add person, let's add a user called Alice. And let's create Alice Allen. Alice at democloud.one. Activate now. I will set the password for Alice. That is save. What? Please state character, lower letter, higher letter. Okay. I need to have password generator for this now. There you go. Okay. So we have Alice being created. Alice is active. If we go ahead and refresh, not yet available here. Why? Because this is a directory where you are creating the users. For the user to become part of your application, you'll have to add them to the application, and the application is Identity Center. So let's assign Alice. Alice is also assigned. Now, if I go ahead and refresh through skim, you can find Alice appears here. And also, if I can make Alice part of the group, assign people, assigned. Let's go back to groups and check if Alice is enabled in the group. And if since she's enabled, instead of Bob, let's log in as Alice. That's federated identity. You have your identity source defined somewhere else. It takes eternity. Let's. I hope this could be faster in loading. Now, guys, I want you to focus on, since we have changed the URL, as soon as it goes to the access portal, you will find that from the access portal, it takes you to AWS, from AWS access portal, it takes you to Okta, right? So I'll show you as soon as it loads. So authentication is done by Okta, and then the token being provided based on that, the SSO function, single sign-on. Yeah, there you go. Signing in, and it signed me in as Bob again. Not Bob, I want to sign in as Alice. So we'll have to wait till the time it completely signs off Bob. Guys, by all these demos, I suppose you understood. I started with, for Okta, I've started with zero. I mean, literally, I just uh, had my domain that I had configured, bought from GoDaddy, and an email ID from GoDaddy itself. And then in Okta, I went for a free trial for democloud.one. That's my domain that I had bought. And there's the free trial account that I'm using from Okta. Makes it a little more simple. It's not necessary that you have to use Okta. You can use Ping. You can, in fact, configure ADFS as well, Active Directory Federation Service. So in your company, if you have an Active Directory server, you can go with the Active Directory Federation Services, and you can have metadata downloaded here. Now it will work exactly the same way. So if you configure your Active Directory Federation service to push the groups and the selected users to Identity Center through SAML, it will do that job. This is taking quite long. I would rather move to the next phase. I suppose by now you might have taken this, that it's quite easy for you to configure federated identity and third-party identity provider for AWS. Now we are moving to the next part, that is logging and monitoring for IAM activities. Logging and monitoring for IAM activities. The name of the service that can let you do this is called CloudTrail. Guys, CloudTrail is a name of a service in AWS that lets you keep a track of all the activities. So who did what, from where, when, which resources were affected, all that information comes to CloudTrail. For example, if I go to event, if I see full event history, there you go. User authentication, log out, and you can see the username, who logged out, who logged in. Is it federated, console login, right? Before this I had created. So all those activities are logged. Resource type, I want to say resource type as, I want to see only S3 bucket related events. It shows demo user created a bucket. Now if I click on this create bucket, you will have complete details. The name of the user, which account, 4739 for this account. Demo user, for S3 service, did create bucket API call in US East 1 using this IP address. That's basically my public IP. So you can see this is my public IP. So from this machine, Macintosh on Intel, the error code was access denied since demo user did not have permission to create this bucket, right? AWS API call, it failed. So by reading all this event record, I can easily understand, as I said, who did what, when, from where, which service and resources were affected, all that information, right? So it becomes quite easy for you to monitor. And see, right now this is monitoring, but if you want, you can go to CloudWatch and you can configure a CloudWatch log to have all these events being logged into CloudWatch. You can use CloudWatch log insights, right, to gain a complete understanding of your IAM understanding for it. So CloudTrail is a service that can help you a lot. Okay. Fifth is IAM best practices. Let's go through IAM best practices. First thing first, always and always enable MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? Say for example, for this user admin, it says that MFA is not enabled. To enable MFA, you can go to any user. Let me go to user demo user. You can go to security credential and here is MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? I can assign MFA device. Okay. Now for adding this, let me give it a name, demo user MFA. Now I'm going to use an authenticator app. You might have seen in companies, people, they do carry this secure ID. I don't see it as much now, but there are these kind of devices, token devices, right? This is what it is asking for. If you have a device, you can use that, but an easier way to achieve that is using authenticator app. There is Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator. There are so many authenticator apps that can help you with this. So what I'm doing is I'm using Google Authenticator. So I select Authenticator app, click on next. And let me show you what I'm doing on my mobile. On my mobile, I'm starting this Google Authenticator app plus scan QR code. And it's just going to wait for scan QR code. And this is the QR code that I'm scanning. It has added demo user. I have to enter the first MFA code. And once that expires, I'm going to enter the second one. That's how you add multi-factor authentication to a user. That's the second one. and add MFA. Done. Benefit of this is even if my username and password is compromised for the demo user now, even if somebody has password, after the first password challenge, the next one is to enter the code that remains specifically, it remains only on your mobile. But of course, mobile is a personal device. You don't give it to other people to use, right? So that way you can keep it secure. So always enable MFA, multi-factor authentication for a user. Second, if you do not use an access key, it's recommended to deactivate, right? To keep it deactivated if you are not using the access key for the user. It is also recommended to rotate access key. So you can create two access keys. 32EK, if I click on create access key, two OXB, continue. Now you can see I've got two access keys. 20XB is the new one and this is the old one, right? Rotating the access key is what? Rotating the access key will make sure that if in case your access key is compromised, you're creating a new one and assigning a new one. That way you'll be safe. So what I do is once a new one is created, I deactivate the old one. Deactivate, right? And if you want, you can also delete it. It's recommended to keep it deactivated. Do not delete it immediately. You may need if in case, but if you're sure that you're not going to use it anywhere, if you've revoked it, removed it from all the system, you can go ahead and delete the old access key and now the new one is in place for the user, right? Next, make sure that your user is not having an overly permissive policy. Grant policies, permissions, and actions only what is needed for the user. Always follow principle of least privilege. Least privilege says grant only the permissions which are needed and keep everything else at bay. You'll be safe and secure. Next, if you are not going to use the role, keep it at bay. Again, do not, you can delete the roles in fact if you're not going to use it. So if it is customer managed, if it's something that you have created, and you can follow security design principle of AWS framework, well-architected framework. So AWS well-architected framework, security pillar has design principles. Let's see. Better get PDF. Here it is. The design principle of security here says implement a strong identity foundation, making sure that least privilege is always taken into consideration. This is always configured with least privileges. Enforce separation of duties with appropriate authorization. So make sure that people, those who don't need it, do not provide them access to the resources. Maintain traceability. So you should be able to monitor If something goes wrong, you need to configure an alert in CloudWatch. You can do that. Audit actions through CloudTrail. And you need to keep a record of all the changes in your environment in real time. You can use AWS config for it. Apply security at all layers. So be it username, password, access key. For infrastructure, you can make use of NACL, security group, AWS firewall, right? So if you read the design principles for security, you'll get to understand at what all levels do you need to focus on. As far as IAM best practices are concerned, just make sure that you're rotating the password, you're rotating the credential, not just password. I mean, credential is, I'm sorry, credential is for your username and password. Credential is for your access key and secret access key. Making sure that your policies are not overly permissive. You can use policy troubleshooter, right? If you're creating a policy, you can use tools like AWS policy simulator or troubleshooter for testing your policy. So there is policysim.aws.amazon.com. If you're writing the policy, if you're creating the policy, you want to check in a simulated environment what all permissions it's going to grant and how is it going to affect it. Policy simulator is a tool to go with. Yep. So that's it about the IAM best practices. And that's it for as far as your IAM open masterclass is concerned. Guys, I hope you liked it. And there are so many things that can be covered, but I think so if you focus on whatever has been spoken about, that is going to be more than enough information for anyone to prepare for the exam, be it for associate or at professional level. For professional level, but of course you'll have to read more. You need more of a practice. But yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you so much, guys. And I'll see you again for another open masterclass. I hope this was informative and this will prove to be useful for people, those who may watch it later. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a good day.